There was one more bill by Representative Bezajewski, Bill number 7922, which removes the sunset on historic preservation tax credits. The fiscal impact is undeterminable. Any questions on that bill, please?
Okay, thank you.
You're
now
live.
It's on. Okay, great. Well, thank you for hearing this testimony. I'm Valerie Talmadge. I'm the Executive Director of Preserve Rhode Island. I've testified to this body several times about the historic tax credits in the past. I know you have a long night ahead of you, so I'm going to be very quick. We've submitted written testimony and also compiled some testimony from others to save you additional hearing people. It's a very simple bill. When you passed the revival of the historic tax credits in Rhode Island in 2013, you imposed both a cap of funding and a sunset for June 30th of this year. There are still nearly 20 projects on the waiting list waiting for funding. As you know, the 2013 program was immediately oversubscribed, and there have been more than 40 projects that have been funded through this project, and it's been a really great success. Funds are slowly becoming available to fund the projects on the waiting list. You basically have to wait for a project ahead of you in line to die, which is sad, or more usually to come in at a lower amount, and so they don't use up all the credits, which then releases more credits for the projects on the waiting list. If the sunset occurs, those projects in the waiting list will be killed. There will not be an opportunity for those projects to do, and the program will absolutely die. So we really urge you just to remove the sunset and let the waiting list progress as it's going. So that's what we're out here for.
Thank you very much for your testimony, ma'am. Sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Scott Wolf. I'm Executive Director of Grow Smart Rhode Island. We're a group that's fighting hard, along with all of you, for sustainable, equitable economic growth in Rhode Island. We think the state historic tax credit has been a key tool for achieving those objectives, at least moving us on the path towards those objectives. As I think you know, it's been responsible for rehabilitating hundreds of underutilized commercial historic buildings over the last decade. It's also resulted in the cleanup of brownfields. It's generated millions of dollars in additional municipal and state tax revenue, and a lot of long-term jobs as well as construction jobs. So as we understand the sunset provision, we believe, as my colleague Valerie mentioned, that this would mean that 17 or 18 projects that are on the waiting list would not have an opportunity to pursue this program, and therefore the potential valuable economic energy their projects would produce would be lost to the state. And I think at a time when we're trying hard to sustain an economic comeback, trying to improve our image as a business-friendly place, this would be definitely a step in the wrong direction. So we strongly support the bill to repeal this sunset and to enable us to capitalize fully on one of our best assets, which is our incredible collection of historic buildings and historic neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. Proceed, please, sir.
Chairman Abney and the committee, thank you so much for allowing me to testify briefly. I'm Barnaby Evans, the Executive Director of Waterfire Providence, and I've spoken with all of you many times before, and we appreciate your support. I'm speaking in favor of this bill. The Rhode Island Historic Tax Credit has been an amazing success. That oversubscription that happened right away was because it was a program that allowed the very difficult task of preserving the amazing history of Rhode Island, which is often found in its built structures. When our choices are to tear down these older buildings and replace them with new, or what we all would prefer, and it's better for the ecology and better for the environment, is to preserve this history, but that construction is a little more expensive. So the tax credit helped cover that gap. There have been, as you mentioned, 40 projects that have been successful. I think there are another 20 or so still coming. The sunset just allows a successful program to continue. It doesn't put any more money into the program. I'm going to give you written testimony for 20 people in support of it. including people like Leslie Gardner, who was head of the Capitol Center Commission and the chair of the Providence Warwick Convention and Visitors Bureau. When we have about 1 million people come to Providence to see Waterfire each year, spending their dollars and staying in our hotels, one of the things they love about Providence is the amazing amount of history they can see all around the city and all around the state. And this program helped make that possible. We also are renovating a building, and this would be an important part for us, as we looked at something out in Olneyville, in an underserved and underactive part of the city. The extra costs of taking on over $1 million of environmental degradation from hundreds of years ago makes people take pause to take on projects like this. The historic tax credit helps with that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions of any witnesses? Representative Tabone.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you again for all your hard work and for coming today. Just a quick question. Obviously, last year we passed Rebuild Rhode Island, and there was a lot of enthusiasm behind it. We're coming to the point now where some of these projects are close to being funded, and there have been some stalling. How would this, in your interpretation of how Rebuild, and don't get me wrong, I put in the bill last year for $220 million for historic tax credit, so I'm with you. But when you compare Rebuild and historic tax credit program or something like this, what would the interpretation be, just for myself, my colleagues, and for the people watching?
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's important that this sunset be eliminated is that the jury, at least some people I talk to, the jury is out on whether Rebuild is really an adequate and user-friendly enough incentive for the rehab of historic buildings, particularly smaller historic rehab projects on our main streets and in our downtown areas. And so I think we want to preserve the option for those kinds of projects of being able to access the State Historic Tax Credit Program and potentially consider infusing the State Historic Tax Credit Program with some new funds targeted to those smaller kinds of projects. So I think that's another reason, because of the uncertainty about whether Rebuild is going to be able to work out all the kinks. I think they're trying to do that, but there's some question about whether Rebuild is really a tax credit program or a low-interest loan program. The requirement for some return on investment is making it a little bit complicated for these deals to close.
I just want to add, we did an analysis of all the projects that have used the state historic tax credit, and the 80-20 rule, it really works for this program. About 80% of the projects use 20% of the money. So the majority of the historic rehab projects are neighborhood scale. They're really small rehabs that make a big difference in downtowns, in your neighborhood. The big projects may get all the attention, but it's really the small projects that are the bread and butter of the program. So, and those big projects are the ones that are capturing the attention of the Commerce RI under Rebuild Rhode Island. The small neighborhood scale projects just can't compete in that environment, and that's why we really do need the historic tax credit to continue in some way. And I would bet that 80% of the waiting list are projects that are going to use much less than $1 million in credits individually.
Any other questions? I'm sorry.
I just add one more thought there, because these two covered most of it. Two aspects. One is, remember, the Historic Tax Credit Program is for very carefully vetted projects. They have to be on the National Historic Register. They've got to declare their historical importance. They've got to be renewed under very strict guidelines, both for long-term effectiveness and accuracy, and also through Ted Sanderson's program on what's historically important. But also, the Commerce RI is working valiantly to figure out the best way to invest those dollars you granted to them for that program. But it doesn't, there's a disadvantage always for historic renovation, because it's so much more expensive to figure out how to restore what was there of our heritage. So the Commerce RI program right now is sort of value neutral with respect to historicity, but this program is what focuses on how do we preserve the history of the state. So that's one difference as well.
And one other thing I'd like to point out is that historic rehab is much more labor-intensive than new construction.
So it makes lots of jobs.
To the extent that we're trying to still stimulate our economy more, historic rehab is a very good engine for that.
Creates more jobs per square foot built than new building.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. There are no-
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for hearing my comments. I'm Barbara Sokoloff, and I'm in planning and development consulting, working on community development projects, very many affordable housing developments, and other types of community projects such as the Boise Girls Club or Waterfire, other projects like this. What we do is we put together sources of funding and help nonprofits primarily to develop affordable housing or their buildings. And we have done probably over a dozen developments through the years using the state historical tax credit. It has been a very valuable resource, making the difference as to whether or not a lot of these projects can go forward or not go forward. Our projects that we have done, 3 in this last round, are from Cumberland to Warwick. We've just finished the Gately building in downtown Pawtucket, the AS 220 buildings in downtown Providence. These are all projects that really need this money as a valuable source because they're limited in the amount of debt that they can support. So I strongly encourage you to eliminate the sunset so that more projects can go forward. We're involved with a number of community development projects that are on that list and think it's very important to the revitalization of the cities and towns in Rhode Island. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions?